Hi folks, I'm here to talk to you today about chords and how you make them from scales and what the relationship is between chords and scales. And the thing that I'm going to be using to do this explanation is a web tool made by the NYU Music Experience Design Lab called the aQWERTYon, or aQWERTYon. So what the aQWERTYon is designed to do is make your regular computer keyboard, your QWERTY keyboard, into a playable musical instrument. So if you look down here at the bottom of the screen, you've got this representation of your computer keyboard along with the notes that are going to be played when you press these different keys. So if I press the letter Z, then I get a C. If I press the letter X, I get a D, and so on along the bottom row of the keyboard. And the middle row, the next row of the keyboard, starting with ASD, and the next row starting with QWERTY, and then the top, the number row. So we staggered the scales along these rows of keys for a reason, which is when you play a column, for example, the letters Z, A, Q, and the number 1, this lovely chord. And if I play the next column, X, S, W, 2, I get this lovely chord. So it's possible to discover chords this way totally naively without having any idea what you're doing at all. And this is something that I really encourage you to do before we get into the music theory. I encourage you to pause this video, load up the aQWERTYon, link is in the description, and just play around with some chords. See if you can find any interesting combinations, see if you can figure out any songs that you know. You will probably stumble across some familiar stuff just by poking around. And after you spend a few minutes doing that, you should come back here and I'll explain what is going on. Okay, so here is how you make chords from a scale. There's a really simple formula. You just start on any note in the scale, for example, the first one, and then you skip the second one and play the third one. And then you skip the fourth one and play the fifth one. So we're just going every other note in the scale. And when you do that, you get this lovely chord. It's called a triad. This is called a C major triad. Don't worry about why it's called that for now. If I start on the second note and skip the third note, go to the fourth note, and then skip the fifth note and go to the sixth note, I get this lovely sound. This is a D minor triad. If I start on the third note, skip the 4, go to 5, skip the 6 and go to 7, I get this nice E minor triad. And I can start on 5 and go every other note, and so on. So that's the same thing as playing the columns, right? Playing the columns just gives you every other note. So check out the numbers at the top of each column. In music theory, we often refer to these chords using Roman numerals. And the Roman numeral just refers to what scale degree is at the bottom of the chord. So if I make a chord starting on the 4th scale degree here, on F, that's called the 4 chord. And on the aQWERTYon, it has the number 4 on top of it. If I make a chord starting on number 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, then I get this chord that has this column that has the number 6 on top. This is the 6 chord. Got the 7 chord, the 5 chord, the 2 chord. So that's the formula. And you don't really need to know what these chords are called or how they work to be able to make music with them. The beautiful thing about the chords that you get from the major scale is that they all sound pretty good in pretty much any order. And that makes sense because the individual notes in the scale Like that didn't sound totally musical, but it also didn't sound unmusical, right? Like these 7 notes, there's really no totally awful combination of them. And the chords are really just those same 7 notes, but played simultaneously instead of sequentially. So there's no combination of these chords that really sounds bad either. Yeah, and some combinations will definitely sound better than others, depending on the rhythm, depending on the amount of time that you spend on each chord, on where the chords fall in the metrical scheme, what instruments you're using. I mean, all kinds of different factors. And in Western classical music, there are many, many rules telling you which chords are allowed to follow which other chords. But outside of Western classical music, those rules are they don't necessarily apply. Like they don't necessarily apply in pop music or jazz or many other kinds of music. Really, you should just let your ear be be the guide as to which combinations of chords sound good and which ones don't. Okay, so far we've only been talking about triads, which are chords with 3 notes in them. But you can also make chords that have more notes in them. For example, you can make notes with chords rather with 4 notes. So I'm going to start on 1. I'm going to go to 3. I'm going to go to 5. Then I'm going to go to 7. So in other words, I kept going with this every other note formula. So this is called a 7th chord, a C major 7th chord. And it's called that because it's got this 7th note of the scale in it. But so any chord that you make this way with 4 notes in it is going to be called a 7th chord. So if I start on 2, if I start on D, that's a D minor 7th chord, an E minor 7th chord. Okay, so the layout of the keyboard is preventing me from easily playing that E minor 7th, but there we are, I can play it there. So the 7th chords are a lot more kind of intellectual sounding, right? They're a lot jazzier, they're more complex, they're more grown-up sounding, if you want to think about it that way. And so the question is, should you be putting 7ths in your chords or not? Well, it depends on the style of music, right? So if you're doing like a nursery rhyme or like a classic rock song or a reggae song or like a Disney musical, probably just want to stick to the triads, stick to the 3-note chords. But if you're doing R&B, funk, soul, definitely jazz, then you absolutely want to be putting 7ths in your chords. And you can go beyond 7ths. So you can do 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. You can make 9th chords with 5 notes. And you can put 6 notes in there. You can even put 7 notes in there, but at that point you're just playing every note in the scale at once, and that sounds pretty muddy. So I would not advise it. But you're allowed. The main thing to know, though, is that this formula we've been using of just picking a note and going around the circle, hitting every other note, it doesn't just work for the major scale. It works for all the scales that have 7 notes in them, all the diatonic modes and all the minor scales. So I'm going to go over here and switch from major to Mixolydian. And I can use that same formula of just, ooh, that's different, because Mixolydian mode has got that in it. It's got this B flat instead of B natural. So that's actually the same as a major scale. Ooh, that's different. Yeah, any chord in Mixolydian that's got that B flat in it is going to sound different from major. So the chords from Mixolydian feel pretty different. Yeah, Mixolydian mode's really important for rock. That movement from the 1 chord to that flat 7 chord to 1, and also going 1, flat 7, 4, 1. that's a real classic rockism. So for example, the Beatles' Hey Jude. Na, 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 hey Jude. Yeah, and about 10,000 other classic rock songs. And again, you don't need to know what any of those individual chords are called. You don't really even need to know how they work. You just need to know how you're able to generate them. And you have to know that Mixolydian still is pretty happy, but not quite as bright as major. It's got a little bit more of a twinge to it. It's a little darker, a little more dissonant. Now I'm going to go to Dorian mode. This has got another flat in it, another blue note, another sad note, and the chords are correspondingly darker. Yeah, so much jazzier. So again, you don't really have to know what you're doing. You could pick pretty much any scale in here from the ones that have 7 notes in them. And so here's, for example, Phrygian dominant mode. It's a lot more exotic. And so as you'd expect, the chords are a lot darker. Yeah, good for this kind of Middle Eastern flamenco-y sound. So in some other videos, I will explain how these chords actually work and a little bit more specifically about how you should use them. But as I said earlier in the video, the best thing to do is just open this thing up on your computer, pick a scale, and start playing around. See what you can discover, because I bet you're going to discover something that you like. Also in the description, I'm going to put a link to some suggestions for how you can record your aQWERTYon performances. So if you stumble on something good, you want to record it, you should do that. So anyway, thanks for watching.